So, buenos dias. Good morning. So, my Spanish is not too good, so I'm going to speak in English. Okay? Is that allowed? So, I must start by saying our prayers with Dr. Rodrigo Laura. We're going to keep him and his family in our prayers. Okay? So, I have to start on my topic. So today we're going to be discussing soil contamination by salts, heavy metals, pesticides in agroecosystems. And we're going to look at some concept perspectives. And at the end, we're going to offer some recommendation. I'm going to try my best to speak very slowly. Hopefully that will make a difference. Okay? All right, my name is Theo Digwe, and I'm a soil scientist. My background is in soil chemistry. I studied soil science in Nigeria. I also studied soil science in the United States. So I went to Louisiana State University, where I got my master's and PhD. And I also work in various universities before transitioning to the industry. So I'm currently the Chief Science Officer for Dynamic Green Concept. And it's my pleasure to be here. And I also want to thank all the organizers for putting this together. Okay? So, I would like to start with some background information, so background facts that some of us here are already familiar with this topic. And we're going to go on and look at some background information that will help us understand our discussion better today. Agricultural activities introduces contaminants in the soil system. And we all know that we use pesticides. And also there are a lot of heavy metals which are being transferred, from manure or biosolid into the soil when it's applied to the soil. And there are a lot of nutrients that we apply, and the plants don't use all the nutrients. So some of these nutrients will be washed off and end up in the water bodies. And there are various health-related issues. There are a number of health-related issues or risks caused by contaminants, agricultural contaminants. Okay, so agriculture is associated with a lot of health problems as well. Okay. The use of pesticide has been an issue. Over the years, we continue using pesticides, and sometimes these pesticides, they remain in the soil system. Sometimes they are transferred to the food system, and it gets to us. So pesticides is a big issue. Like over 11 billion kilograms of pesticide active ingredient was used worldwide in 2007. And this is huge. US alone used 2.5 billion kilograms in US alone, and that is very huge. Okay? Agriculture accounts for about 70% of this. So we are responsible for the pesticides in our environment, right? Because agriculture accounts for about 70%. That is huge. Also, the use of fertilizer is also increasing. Over the years from 1960 to 2008, there is more or less a positive trend. Particularly for that of nitrogen, we are using almost 4 to 5 times more nitrogen than we use in 1960. You see that? So there is a lot of, an increase in the use of fertilizer. And where do this end? Sometimes this remain in the soil, and during runoff, we lose them in surface runoff, and sometimes they make it all the way back to our food system, which is not desirable. Okay. So the background information continues. Salt is another issue. There are a lot of salts in agricultural systems, and about 23% of agricultural land are salt impacted. And out of that number, about 50% come from where? Irrigated field. What is it telling us? That irrigation is another big issue. So most of the salt contaminated soil are irrigated fields. Why? Because sometimes the water we use are poor. Sometimes we pump water from the groundwater, and the water is already salty. So over time, they accumulate on the soil surface. And this keep on, occurring, and it's going to lead to or damage the soil. And salt problem is still increasing, because sometimes in some places the amount of rainfall is decreasing. So what is going to happen when the rainfall decreases? Most of the soil there cannot be washed out, so they keep on accumulating in the soil. So the problem is everywhere, okay? So a good question to ask would be, could contaminant risk to human increase in the future in this era of climate change? Can climate change impact the increase of contaminant risk to humans? That's a good question that we're going to address along the way, okay? Soil pollution, Colombia is not strange to soil pollution. Soil pollution is also common in Colombia. When we came here, some days ago, I had some conversation with some scientists, and they were telling me of the numerous soil problems. And they mentioned acidity, which I understand because you guys have rainfall here, and it's more like a humid area, so you're going to lose a lot of salt, and there's going to be acidity. And also in some areas, there's going to be salt as well. And metal toxicity. They were talking about cadmium, a lot of cadmium in the soil. That turned out to be an issue as well, okay? And water quality is also going to be a problem. You don't need to tell me that, because once there is rain, once there is enough rain, there's going to be water quality issues because of runoff, So the vegetation is exposed in some places. So when there is rain, there's going to be runoff. And we are using nutrients. We are using fertilizers. We are using pesticide. So all of them are going to be washed off, during runoff. So Colombia is not alone, all right? Other parts of the world also have this problem. That's why we as soil scientists, we have to make contributions on how to solve some of these problems. So the way the discussion is going to go, we're going to look at contaminants and their sources in agricultural systems. We'll look at different contaminants. We're going to take a look at the contaminant chemistry, just a brief look at the chemistry of this contaminant, because if you understand the chemistry of the contaminant, you're going to understand the environmental fate. Okay, so it's necessary to understand the chemistry of this contaminant. Then we're going to look at some predictive relationships. Because of this chemistry, there's going to be some interactions between this contaminant and some soil constituent, which is going to lead us to some relationship that can help us in the future. So we're going to look at a few of those relationships. And we're going to look at the impact of climate change on contaminant fate. We're going to look at that. And at the end, we're all scientists. So at the end, we're going to look at how can we help the situation, best management practices that we can use to fight contaminants, pollutants in this era of climate change. So that's how we're going to go. Okay. So I want to start by looking at the groups of contaminants or pollutants in agricultural system. There is a group of contaminants that we can group under organic contaminants in agricultural system. So we're going to start looking at the organic contaminants. The organic contaminants, for instance, they're going to be the pesticides. Some of the pesticides are organic. And we have organic matter. Organic matter is very useful, but also it's a form of contaminant, its own way. Okay? And we're going to look at it. So we're going to have organic carbon, organic matter. And if you are familiar with the study of water quality, you're going to know that organic carbon is responsible for contamination of water body because of, they cause BOD. BOD is biochemical oxygen demand, which is more or less of the amount of oxygen, dissolved in the water body. So the more the carbon, the lower the amount of oxygen. Okay, so organic carbon, organic matter is responsible to that. So what are the sources? What are the sources of these organic contaminants? So the sources of this organic contaminant will come from pesticides, because some pesticides are organic, animal manure that we use, sewage sludge, that's biosolids, and there's some crop residue. These are the sources of this organic contaminant. Okay, so we have organic contaminant and we have the sources. Another group of contaminant would be the inorganic contaminants. When we're talking about inorganic contaminant, what do we mean? We look at the nutrients like phosphorus, nutrients like nitrogen. All these are contaminants as well. They have nutrients, but they're also contaminants. All right, so this is organic contaminant. Then we also have the heavy metals. Heavy metal is already a problem in some part of Colombia, like cadmium, as I heard. So you're going to have the heavy metals like lead, chromium, cadmium, copper, zinc, and so on. All these are introduced to the soil through some agricultural activities, and they also contaminant that troubles us. And we have some oxyanions like arsenic, arsenite, sulfate, and carbonate. All these are contaminants that are grouped under inorganic contaminants that are found in agricultural system. Then we have suspended solids that we found in water. During runoff, you're going to have suspended solids in water. So these are inorganic contaminants. Then we have salts, which are problems. We have the chloride salts, carbonate salts of calcium, magnesium, and sodium. All these are contaminants that are grouped under inorganic that are found in the soil system. Okay, soil water system. And what are the sources? The sources are agricultural chemicals like fertilizer, lime, pesticides, sewage sludge, animal manure, compost, irrigation are the sources of salt in our agricultural system. Okay, so the next group would be some radionuclides. That's from radioactive materials. Some of you don't know, or I know that maybe one of us, because I didn't know before that agriculture contributed lots to radionuclide materials in the soil system, but it does. So where are the sources of these radionuclides? The sources are from phosphate fertilizer. Phosphate fertilizers contain some traces of radioactive materials, okay? And there is a product called phosphogypsum, which is a byproduct or raw material from phosphorus industries. So one of the wastes there is something they call phosphogypsum. That sometimes farmers apply this to the field, because it contains phosphorus and it contains calcium. So that also causes contamination. Then fly ash is another source of radionuclides, in the soil, in agricultural fields or agro-ecosystem. So these are the sources, and I would like you all to take note of that. So another major contaminant that we have in the agricultural systems will be the pathogens. Pathogens like virus, bacteria, protozoa, and so on. Where are these coming from? Where do they come from? They come from manure that we use. They come from biosolid that we use. So some of this manure and biosolid or sewage sludge that we apply to the field to increase nutrient level, they also contain contaminants, which turn out to be an issue sometimes because they will make it into our food system if not controlled. Okay? So now we have gone through the different sources of contaminants, and we give some example. So we're going to look at the basic chemistry. We are not going to go so deep into the chemistry, but if you understand the chemistry of this contaminant, it helps in situations like, designing a means to control them. It helps us to understand the environmental fate. So we're going to look at the contaminant chemistry. Not so deep, we're not going to go too far, but we're just going to, take a look at some of these. All right, the chemistry of contaminant determines their behavior in the environment. If you know their chemistry, it may help you to understand their behavior. There are different, processes that some of these contaminants go through. For instance, of course, they have different forms. They come in different forms, which I'm going to give an example. They undergo oxidation. Some of them undergo speciation. Some of them undergo precipitation. All these are chemistry terms, and a lot of more. Some of them undergo dissolution. Some of them undergo reduction, surface complexation, volatilization, adsorption. These are chemical processes that some of these contaminants go through. And we're going to take a few of them and kind of illustrate. For instance, contaminants come in different forms. We can call them species, for instance. So some of the contaminants like copper, iron, nickel, lead, even nitrogen and phosphorus, they have multiple oxidation states. All right, they can come in different oxidation states, for instance. And the chemistry varies depending on the species, on the oxidation state. You know, so that's very important thing. Like for instance, I think nitrite is more dangerous than nitrate, and the arsenic 3 may be more dangerous than arsenic 5 or so, if I remember correctly, but the state that they found themselves vary, and it matters a lot. Like for instance, iron 2 is more soluble than iron 3. Okay, so that's why we look at their chemistry to understand their fate in the environment. So sometimes they can also come as free ions in the solution, like copper ion, calcium ion, iron, or they can come in compounds, you know, like calcium oxide, calcium carbonate, copper oxide. So they can come as free, and they can come in the form of compound, and the chemistry of all these varies. Okay, so sometimes they're tied up in organic materials, you know, like organic materials, they're tied up there in the form of organic P, organic nitrogen, you know, and the chemistry of that will also differ. So they go through absorption, surface composition, precipitation. All these are just forms of sorption. I think all these fall under the category of sorption. The definition of sorption, all these fall under sorption. So these metals such as copper, iron, aluminum, and all those things, they undergo precipitation, undergo adsorption under soil colloid. Okay, even pesticide, organic matter, and clay. You know, they are materials that can capture, you know, pesticide, because pesticide are absorbed onto these materials like organic matter and clay. And some of these contaminants, they may also go through ionic exchange. Ionic exchange will be exchanging one ion for the other, like calcium going for sodium and so on. So all these happen in the soil system. And we have a lot more of them, you know, like oxidation, nitrogen undergo oxidation. Reduction, nitrogen also undergo reduction. We have volatilization. Volatilization, for instance, ammonia. You know, ammonia can volatilize. And we have dissolution. Sometimes this salt, they can dissolve and, you know, into different species. So these are some of the processes or the chemistry of these contaminants. We're not going to go through deep into them, but just to give you an idea of the basic chemistry behind some of these contaminants. Okay. So the next part of this discussion, we're going to look at contaminant interaction with soil constituents. That will help us look at some predictive relationship. So the contaminant, one aspect of their chemistry is that they interact with soil constituents. You know, they can form relationship with soil constituents. So this interaction enables us to come up with some basic relationship that can help us to predict in the future. Okay, and we're going to look at some of these interactions. So we have some heavy metals like chromium, iron, nickel, copper, zinc, lead. Then we have arsenic. Arsenic is not categorized as a heavy metal. It's a metalloid that is in between a metal and non-metal. But sometimes it behaves like a metal in some environment. So there is a strong relationship between these heavy metals and clay. Okay, there's a strong relationship between these heavy metals, organic matter, and carbonate. Okay, so you're going to find in some soils, you're going to find some relationship between these heavy metals and clay. You know, so the more the clay, the more these heavy metals could be in some soil because clay captures them. The same thing with organic matter. And also carbonate tend to form some relationship or complex with some of these pollutants. Okay, so there is an interaction between these heavy metals and clay, organic matter, and carbonate. And there is a strong interaction between these materials and pH of the soil. The pH of the soil is a master variable. So most of the time, these materials, since they are metals, they're going to be more soluble under low pH. So in lower pH, the activity will be more under low pH. Okay? So pH also controls the solubility and the speciation. We're not going to go so deep into the chemistry, just to give you a basic idea. All right, because pH, I mean, we deal with pH every time. pH is the most important thing that we look at because that controls a lot of things. Okay, so going further, some of these pollutants like nickel, copper, zinc, arsenic, they have interaction with iron oxide in the soil. We have found relationship between these and iron oxide. Sometimes the more the iron oxide, the more some of these contaminants, because iron oxide can bind to this contaminant. Okay? So iron oxide can bind to this contaminant. So in geochemistry, what we usually do is sometimes when we try to determine the source of a contaminant, like copper, nickel, zinc, copper, nickel, zinc, when we try to determine the contaminant, the source, it could either come from man-made, that is, come from man, or it could come from just the natural background. Sometimes the relationship between these metals and iron oxide will give us an idea of the source. So usually, if there is a strong correlation between some of this metal and iron oxide, what it usually tells us is that that concentration is is from the natural environment. It's not caused by man. That's what, we use some of this relationship. Okay? So there is also a very strong relationship between pesticide and organic matter, because organic matter binds on to pesticide. Also, clay binds on to pesticide. So if you have two soil and one has more clay, and you apply the same amount of pesticide, well, the clay soil is going to hold most of those pesticide than the one that doesn't have much clay. So we have to understand some of this relationship because they help us in environmental, remediation and so on. Okay. So we did some studies in the past. This is a result from a study that we conducted. This was done in Texas. The part of Texas where this was done is a dry area. So we tried to find a relationship between some of the soil components and some contaminants or metals. You can see that organic matter, to a reasonable extent, has a positive relationship with some of this metal. But the most important one is when you look at clay. You see, the more the clay, most likely, the more the metals in the soil, because clay can bind onto this metal. So you can see a very more or less strong relationship even in all the elements that we examine. So the more the clay content, we found the more the clay content, the more the metals in the soil. And the pH has a very expected trend. There's a negative relationship because these metals will tend to be more available on the low pH. That's why we have that negative relationship. Okay? One other study that very, very important in the study of water quality is the relationship between some soil parameters like clay and surface water quality. So the TSS there stands for total suspended solids, and the PP stands for particulate phosphorus. Okay? So we found a relationship between the amount of clay in the soil and the amount of total suspended solid in runoff. We also found a relationship between clay and the amount of particulate phosphorus in the runoff. So what controls the amount of suspended solids from a soil in a runoff, what controls that is clay. So the more the clay, the more the runoff, because clay reduces the infiltration. So when the infiltration is low, there's going to be a little bit more runoff compared to when the infiltration is high. Okay, so clay, we can use clay, the amount of clay, to draw up a relationship, between clay and total suspended solids in runoff. Why is this important? the more the total suspended solids in runoff, the more the pesticide too, because the pesticide bind to those material. So there is a relationship between amount of total suspended solids and the pesticide. So all these basic relationships, they help us to make some predictions, okay? We may not know the soils in an area, but if you can give us some of these parameters, we can use that, to develop some relationship, to give some feedback before we even start conducting any research in that area, okay? So now, one of the main things that, which is almost part of the theme for this conference, is to look at the impact of climate change on what we do. So how would climate change impact contaminant fate? Another way to put it is, could contaminant risks to human increase in the future as a result of climate change? Is there going to be a change in contaminant risk? Is it going to increase, with climate change? And we all believe in climate change, I hope so, right? So we're going to look at this. So the changing climate could worsen the environmental and human health implications of agricultural intensification. Is this a yes or no? We're going to find out. So let's start looking at temperature, which is an element of climate change. So in some part of the world, they're experiencing an increasing temperature, right? Okay. So the question here is, increasing temperature could lead to more evaporative losses of water. More drought condition could expose soil to runoff. Is that true or false? See or no? See? Any no? No? Okay. See? Okay. So I have another one. Excessive rainfall could increase the chances of surface runoff of agricultural chemicals and applied nutrients to receiving water bodies, and it could increase the risk of nutrients to human. See or no? See or no? See? Okay. So groundwater, okay? So because of lack of rainfall, groundwater is decreasing because of low recharge. And because of dependence on groundwater, we're also pumping from groundwater every time, and there is no recharge. So the level of groundwater is decreasing, right? The level is decreasing. As the level is decreasing, so low precipitation leading to low recharge and depletion of groundwater is also resulting in increasing contaminant level in most groundwater and groundwater irrigated field. So see or no? See? No? See? Okay. All right. More evaporation. Okay? So more evaporation from soil surfaces as a result of intensive or more intense sunlight or whatever could lead to more salinization. See or no? No? Okay. All right. Let's move on to another aspect, which is about the last part of this work. So as scientists, we have to come up with means to help, right? We have to make recommendations based on our research or based on our experience, okay? So we are looking into the best management practices that can help us reduce contaminations in our agricultural field, particularly in this changing climate. Let's look at some of these. So one of the measures here that is application rate for manure. We use manure and sewage sludge to improve nutrients. So application rate for manure and sewage sludge must follow basic guidelines. And we must account for the inherent soil nutrient content. We have to account for the crop nutrient requirement. And we have to account for the availability of the added nutrient. Is that going to help us? See or no? Is that going to help us reduce contamination in our fields, in agricultural field? See or no? Good or bad? So see or no? So? What? Okay. All right, let's move on to the next one. Okay, manure and biosolids should be incorporated immediately after application to minimize loss of nitrogen in the form of ammonia through volatilization and to minimize pathogen release to the environment. Is that a good practice? See or no? See or no? All right. Okay. All right. We have to reduce or stop burning of crop residues and stubble, and we use crop residues as manure or feed or energy. So basically we recycle that instead of burning it. You know, yesterday I gave a lecture of the impact of burning on residue. Instead of burning it, we should do this. Is that going to help or no? See or no? See? You're going to take... So, should we burn it? Huh? Yeah, you use it as manure. Yes, you use your feed or energy instead of burning it. You prefer to burn? Cool. I want to get a see or no on this. See or no? Huh? No, we're going to have that debate later, one-on-one. All right. So, integrated pest management. We're trying to reduce pesticide use, okay? So, integrated pest management. So, the recommendation is use integrated pest management to reduce pesticide use. And what is integrated pest management? It's basically integrating, the lifestyle of the pest and everything, crop planting, population, crop rotation, in order to reduce pest population instead of using pesticide. Is that a good practice or no? See? How many know? See? At the back? Okay. So, there are some other recommendations which I don't know if you guys will agree with me. Okay? So, other best management practices, to reduce contaminant in our field would be to maintain vegetative surface cover, because if you maintain vegetative surface cover, there's going to be less erosion, less runoff, carrying contaminant out of the field. Another one is to implement soil testing. If you implement soil testing, you're going to know the amount of nutrient already in the soil. You're going to know the amount to apply. Another one is to improve the microbial life. If you improve the microbial life, the enzymes there they produce going to help to release nutrients that are tied up in the soil instead of applying nutrient every time. So is this a good practice or a bad practice? Is it see or no? I don't count yours. See or no? Okay, all right. So with that, I want to thank you all for helping me finish my presentation. So gracias. So that's it. Gracias. I want to thank you all. So that is the end. So I want to acknowledge my colleagues, my partners. I want to acknowledge Mr. R. Lewis. He's here. Von Smith. He's our Chief Information Officer, Charlie Langdon. All these guys, we are very, very instrumental in making me come here. So I want to thank them all. And gracias for helping me do my presentation. So everybody here helped me. So thank you so much.
Thank you, tío. Gracias. ¿Preguntas? ¿Más preguntas? Por favor, levante la mano para pasar el papelito mientras que vamos contestando una. Pues si quieres la puedes hacer de una vez mientras que... Sí, sí, mientras.
Son dos preguntas. La primera es, ¿qué diferencia para él existe entre polución en el suelo y contaminación de suelo? O si es lo mismo.
So, if I understand correctly, the question is soil pollution and soil contamination. What's the difference? I mean, I don't know the difference. I use them interchangeably. I use them the same. So, to me, they are the same. So I can say, oh, soil contamination, which is when the contaminants contaminate the soil, or soil pollution. So they're the same to me. Yes, yes.
La segunda es, ¿qué opina él como control de contaminación de suelos, la bioextracción o el uso de organismos para descontaminar suelos?
What do you, de la contaminación.
¿Qué opina sobre el uso de organismos
Para
para
descontaminar.
descontaminación de suelos?
What do you think about the use of microorganisms or organisms to discontaminate soils?
Okay, microorganisms. That's a form of bioremediation. Yes, the question has to do with using a microorganism to control or to decontaminate soil, right?
Earthworms. With earthworms.
With earthworms. Well, I think that's a risk. I don't know. It depends on the contaminant. It depends on the kind of contaminant, because it's not every contaminant that earthworm would, metabolize or break down. Okay, so it's going to depend on the contaminant. Right now, I can't think of the contaminant that are earthworm. Maybe organic matter, it can break down and stuff like that. But I don't know some of these chemicals. No, yeah, but it's a possibility. But I know that some heavy metals and some pesticide, you can use some micro, systems to, engage in bioremediation. Pesticides. I know pesticides, but I don't know of using a earthworm. I can't remember coming across, but it's possible. Okay. Yeah.
Bueno, no conoce bien sobre el tema de que haya usado lombrices para descontaminación. Puede ser, depende de qué tipo de contaminante pueden realmente ser usados para ese tema. Si hay microorganismos, el tema de pesticidas, si hay microorganismos que está trabajando mucho para descontaminar. Pero el tema de lombrices todavía. Pero si hay alguna experiencia, pues interesante porque depende sobre qué está actuando para poder entender el proceso. ¿Ah? Ok.
¿Puedes preguntar, por favor, al doctor la situación del cacao en Colombia, la habilidad de esta especie para tomar el ambiente no contaminados cadmio? Es una situación que debemos conocer una referencia de ellos con respecto a esa disponibilidad de la especie.
Do you have any work or idea about cadmium contamination in cacao?
In cacao.
Cocoa.
Cocoa, okay, in cocoa.
We have what? Chocolate. The chocolate.
Oh, chocolate, right, cocoa, right.
We have the program here.
Okay. All right. That's a very good question. This has to do with if I have any work done on cadmium contamination in cocoa, right? Yeah, so I learned about this some days ago when I had a meeting at the ICA about the cadmium in the soil here. And, we discussed that, and I promised that when I go back, I'm going to look up, literature to see if there is any suggestion that will work in the soil here, that we can, bring to the soil here. There are a number of ways, because that's a heavy metal. So there are a number of things, but we have to do some soil tests or get some background information about the soil here to give the best recommendation. So I have not worked with cadmium directly, but I know about the chemistry, and I believe there could be some management practices that can be implemented to help in the remediation. One of them could be using plant, but we're going to look at this. I promise to look at this later. I don't know if I help.
Ok, que él conoce muy bien sobre el tema de la química del cadmio, que se han usado algunas plantas que son hábiles para poder capturar en el suelo. Es básicamente lo que han trabajado ellos en el tema, que estuvo tratando con un grupo precisamente mirando bien el tema de lo que está pasando con estos tipos de contaminaciones, pero pues básicamente es el tema de entender más el tema de la química de cadmio. There is a kind of ways. If I know the chemistry of the cadmium, if I know the chemistry of the cadmium, can we make kind of a methodology to use for?
If you know the chemistry,
Yeah.
I mean, we need to know some of the soil properties, like amount of iron and all those things in that soil.
Okay.
The amount of iron, aluminum, and some other metals.
Desde la química, él dice que conocer también la interacción con otros nutrientes como el hierro, todos los que puedan estar trabajando en ese sitio para poder entender más cómo hacer el proceso de biorremediación para el tema.
The guy doesn't seem pleased, but I can talk to him later.
Okay. ¿Alguna otra pregunta? De todos modos, que más tardecito pueden hablar.
Okay.
Good morning. My question is, what do you think about the use of sewage sludge as organic amendment in agricultural soils?
Okay. All right. The question is, what do I think about the use of sewage sludge or biosolids, sewage sludge as organic amendment? That's a very good question because that cuts across what I discussed here to an extent. So sewage sludge is a good source of nutrients. It's a good source of nutrients. It contains nitrogen, phosphorus, and some other nutrients. But there is also a problem attached to that because it contains a lot of pathogens. So you're adding sewage sludge, you're adding nutrients, you're also adding pathogens. So the recommendation, like the US EPA, the recommendation is to use treated, sewage sludge, to have it treated or have it undergo composting. So when you do this, it's going to reduce the amount of contaminants, in terms of pathogen there. But there's still going to be some because sometimes heavy metals are already there. But it has to be used treated, but it's used because that's the best storage means, is to use that to apply to agricultural fields to enhance the fertility. But it has to be treated, okay?
¿Alguna otra pregunta? Él habla, sewage son los lodos, ¿no? Que salen. Él habla de que tiene que tomar cualquier producto de estos que vengan así, esos lodos que salgan, tienen que estar limpios, tratados, porque pueden venir también con otros contaminantes o también con patógenos y puede ser más un problema si no se maneja muy bien. Y eso pasa con muchos de nuestros compost. El compost, si no se trata muy bien, nos puede generar un problema después con patógenos que no se va a poder manejar. Entonces también es necesario conocer bien qué es lo que tienen y cómo se deben de tratar antes de usarlos en el proceso de remediación. ¿Preguntas? Bueno, si no, mucho.
Oh, they don't.
Un aviso antes de que salgan, por favor. Por la tarde les recuerdo que tenemos la asamblea de la Sociedad Colombiana de la Ciencia del Suelo y por favor, para poder participar tenemos que estar al día. Entonces, por favor, hablemos con Luz Marina, los que no estamos al día vamos a participar para que nos pongamos al día y podamos participar en la asamblea en las horas de la tarde. Muchas gracias.